We can start.
Yes, it is started now. So once again, a very warm welcome, 158th welcome to this Thursday Musings webinar. A very learned speaker, teacher of teachers today, talking about has the time come to talk of early preemptive interventions for mental health. So next slide, please. I'm handing over the session to Professor Dr. Tufan Pati, sir. Sir is from Cuttack. He's chairman of this program. Everyone knows him well. So, sir, apologies for not reading your CV.
No apology needed. Actually, you must save time because we have an erudite speaker and who is a very good friend of Thursday Musings, and he always like his offbeat topics. My dear friend, Dr. Vivek. Next slide, please. A formal welcome to our moderator, vibrant moderator, Dr. Amrit Patajoshi, with Professor of Psychiatry in High-Tech Medical College along with me, and he had been a direct council member by IPS. He is the president of Indian Psychiatric Society and secretary by Indian Psychiatric Eastern Zonal Branch. Welcome, Amrit. And Dr. Alim Siddiqui, in charge of the treasury of IPS, he is the treasurer of IPS. Next slide, please. Next slide, move on, please. He is the professor of psychiatry in Iras Lucknow Medical College and is the editor-in-chief of Indian Association of Biological Psychiatry. He had been a direct council member before this. He is vice president of IAM Lucknow. Welcome, Alim. Dr. Alim and Dr. Amrit are our vibrant moderators. Next slide, please. Dr. V.S.P. Prasad, our esteemed chairperson from Nasik, is ex-associate professor in psychiatry at MBP Medical College and Hospital. Postgraduate teacher and guide, Maharashtra University of Health Sciences. PG examiner in psychiatry, Maharashtra University of Health Sciences. Consultant at Sujata Birla Hospital and Medical Research Center, honorary psychiatrist, India Security Press Hospital. Special interest music, sports, reading fiction and non-fiction. Areas of interest in psychiatry, addictive disorders, adult psychiatry. Has been a faculty at both international and national forums in psychiatry. Currently active in clinical research. Welcome, Dr. Prasad. Next slide, please. Dr. Smita Nilkant Deshpande. She is a very well-known figure of psychiatry in our country. Professor of psychiatry, served as the HOD of psychiatry in ABVIMS, Dr. RML Hospital, New Delhi, from July 2004 to September 2018. 14 long years, beginning with systems research in 1988. She led over 36 research projects in autism, schizophrenia genetics, clinical trials, psychosocial aspects of mental health, disability and rehabilitation, tobacco cessation, de-addiction, yoga for cognitive enhancement in schizophrenia, and implementation research for agencies such as NIH, WHO, ICMR, DST, and DVT, with more than 250 publications and innumerable presentations. She participated in developing the Indian Scale of Assessment of Autism, ISA, recognized by the Government of India for certifying disability for autism. She was a co-author in Tobacco Cessation Guidelines for Government of India, Montenegro and Kazakhstan. She was a member of developing ICMR Human Research Guidelines for vulnerable groups in 2017. She is on board for several international journals. She is co-chair of World Psychiatric Association Section Genetics. She is an international WHO trainer for tobacco cessation and has visited several countries to train their trainers. Welcome, Dr. Deshpande, and welcome, Dr. Prasad. Here afterwards, the meeting is yours. Please carry on. I am muting myself. Someone has to introduce Dr. Pinnacle, the topic.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for that beautiful introduction, Dr. Pati. I have known you for such a long time, and you are a very humble and unassuming person. And it is indeed extremely creditable that your team, the team led by you with Alim and Amrit, have gone on to the 158th uninterrupted Thursday Musings program. And that is a record in itself. That you've been spreading these interesting and innovative messages about mental health to all our fraternity for such a long time. Vivek is another friend, a very bright thinker, a very innovative thinker, I would think. And he everybody knows about his Veda by now. I've reviewed it myself several times, and we had several discussions about it. But his findings from these projects have been very interesting, and I keep urging him to, publish them more and present them more. And I'm happy that he has taken up this opportunity for talking about his work on Thursday Musings. Indeed, it is now time for us to think about uh, preemptive prevention, rather than just talking about, beating our hands and saying, oh my God, this is what is happening, and such a percentage of people have mental health issues. These are the external causes that cause, some kind of changes in the brain that cause, that finally give rise to mental illnesses. And I'm happy that now he has helped to strike the first uh, blow. And speaking about this very interesting topic today, that is it really time to talk about early preemptive interventions? How early? We will know once Vivek starts speaking. So over to you, Vivek, and please go ahead and enlighten us. I'm sure you will do a wonderful and very humorous job as well. Thank you. Can Vivek be given the mic?
Dr. Prasad, a few opening remarks, please.
Okay. Have I been unmuted? Hello.
You can unmute yourself, Dr. Vivek.
No, I have unmuted myself.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Okay. I am audible. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Smita. And yes, I will take you up on what you said, because a lot of what I am thinking these days is motivated by a lot of the data which came out of the CVEDA project, as well as the other the big cohort that we have, the ADBS cohort, which has now become the Rohini Nilekani Center for Brain and Mind. And as you are aware, the CVEDA has been funded in a new avatar to look at the neurodevelopmental cohort from the antenatal period to 30 years. Now, before I begin, I would actually like to thank Professor Tufanpati and his team, Amrit and others, for providing a platform where one can stray off the beaten track a little bit. Before any people came, I was discussing the fact that I have shamelessly used this platform to basically review certain ideas, to use the opportunity to read, to prepare up for prepare for my presentations, and basically discuss some of the nascent ideas which I've been having, which I've been toying with. And so today, what we will talk about is basically whether there there is enough data to suggest thinking about testing out, starting early intervention, early and especially early universal interventions for mental health. Now, a long time back, almost 20 years back, the WHO, in a position statement, had said that given the current limitations in effectiveness of treatment modalities for decreasing disability due to mental and behavioral disorders, the only sustainable method for reducing the burden caused by these disorders is prevention. 20 years later, things haven't changed, over much. It is well established that early detection, assessment, and intervention of mental health problems in infancy and early childhood is more successful and cost-effective than treatment when symptoms become severe. Now, what has usually been the focus of early intervention based on the work by Pat McGorry and his group in Australia, has been the treatment or the early treatment of early psychosis or prodromal symptoms of psychosis. That's not what we're going to talk about today. That it deserves a separate review by itself. The story as it stands, and I'm going to go very rapidly over some of these things because these are things which are fairly well known. I'm happy to talk about it if anybody wants more clarification. But basically, more or less, it is fairly well accepted that psychiatric disorders are actually disorders of the neurodevelopmental continuum, whether it's schizophrenia, mood disorders, or addictive disorders or ADHD. These are now known to be disorders of the neurodevelopmental continuum. And the fact is that long before symptoms or the syndrome manifests itself, the characteristic psychopathology manifests itself. These are people who've had difficulties, behavioral problems, etc., from childhood, from early childhood. And the ultimate syndrome that we see in adolescence or adulthood is a final outcome, or is a way station on the pathway of a journey that started, of a story that started very, very early on in infancy or even before infancy. We are also fairly comfortable with the idea that when we talk of symptoms, psychopathology, etc., these are actually deviations in psychological capacities, in normal psychological capacities that human beings use to engage with, make sense of their world, and resolve challenges from the external and internal environment. So depression is a quantitative variation of the ability to control mood. Delusions are a quantitative variation of the ability to handle fear, handle threat perception, and so on and so forth. These deviations in psychological capacities, in turn, are consequences of variations in program-dependent or experience-dependent development of brain networks and other organs. Now, let me just add another sentence. What I'm saying here is that when the brain is being formed, it is formed according to a program which is written in our genes. But during development and at various points across the lifespan, exposure to different environmental stressors, exposure to different environmental influences actually causes experience-dependent variation, causes experience-dependent modeling or remodeling of the brain to give rise to differences in brain networks, differences in brain and psychological capacities, so on and so forth. What I'm also saying is that there is now accruing evidence, there's a lot of evidence in the last 5-10 years, that the brain does not mature across the lifespan on its own. It matures along with other organs. And so people who are at greater risk of developing brain and behavior related problems are also likely to have comorbid heart disorders, cancers, and other NCTs as well. So the brain deviates along with deviations in other organs as well. What causes this kinds of deviation? One of the things that is getting more prominent, and there's been a major rush in the literature especially in the last 5 years, is that maternal inflammatory activation, that is activation of the immune activity in the mother, especially during pregnancy, can alter fetal brain development, acting through inflammatory markers like cytokines in the maternal system, which also perturb the inflammatory cytokines in the developing fetus, but also side by side by activating or changing the activity of microglia, which are very, very important important cells which are which are derived from the same tissues that the immune markers, and the other immune cells are. And the microglia are very, very important in the development of the brain, because they control such things as migration, cellular migration, neuronal migration, pruning, myelination, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, any such change in immune activity because of exposure to stress, because of exposure to infection, because of any kind of stressor, results in altered brain networks, and these result in altered psychological capacities. What is also recognized is when maternal immune activation occurs, it trains the fetal immune system. I mean, like immune cells everywhere, the memory of the original stressors are retained in the immune system of the child, and respond to stressors, to other stressors across the lifetime in the future in an exaggerated manner later in life. So primed immune system, which include the primed or the kindled microglia, can mount exaggerated response to stress during experience expected critical developmental windows and across the lifespan. What here I'm saying is that once these immune systems have been primed, whether it is the systemic immune markers, or whether it is the brain immune system, which includes the microglia, the astrocytes, etc., these remain primed to react to future stresses in an exaggerated manner. So people who have had, say, childhood adversity or difficulties during pregnancy are more likely to respond to adult stresses in an exaggerated manner, and that gives rise to some of the difficulties in childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and even during senescence. So basically, we are looking at microglia who have gone rogue, and this has impacts on brain disorders across the lifespan. So here, for example, there is this diagram of a healthy developing central nervous system with normal microglia. But what happens when the microglia, there's earlier microglial dysfunction in the developing CNS, this results in the release of inflammatory cytokines and causes permanent damage of the neuronal network through the altered function of the microglia. Any early challenge to microglia in the developing CNS primes these microglia, and therefore later, you have emergence of disease symptoms which occur in puberty or adulthood, which is very typical of most of our psychiatric disorders. Changes to the microglia in the adult CNS with subsequent exposure to stress or any kind of stress as oxidative stress results in the emergence of disease symptoms in the adult or aged CNS, which gives rise to the disorders, the brain disorders of the adult CNS. Side by side, I've just kept this slide just to remind us that the maternal microbiome also influences the fetal immune system. So the microbiome matures in tandem with or in conversation with the immune system and the neuronal systems. And therefore, these three systems are intimately linked together. And we'll come back to this later. I'm not going to talk about this today in too much detail, but this is also the subject of of areas where there is scope for intervention. So what we see is very, very interesting, and this is very recent data. What we are seeing is that when there is inflammation, cytokines are released, and they activate the microglia and the brain, and inflammation results in very typical alterations in brain circuits. It's not as if any odd thing happens. So three of the most typical things that happen are that inflammation results in alteration in the mesolimbic dopaminergic pathways, from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens to the corticostriate, ventral medial prefrontal cortex. The dopaminergic circuit, the so-called reward circuit, is affected. And therefore, early stress, early inflammation often results in a syndrome of reward deficit, a transdiagnostic, syndrome of reward deficit. Similarly, another circuit which is very, very prone to dysfunction with early stress, with early inflammation, is this corticostriatal pathway, which works through the striatum, putamen, caudate. It's not very important, except to know that these are the motor processing circuits, and these are the circuits which are responsible for emotional regulation and decision making. And so these are also circuits which, with early stress, these are preferentially affected, these are preferentially disturbed. The other circuit, which is preferentially disturbed with early stress, is the very early circuits involving the amygdala, anterior cingulate gyrus, which are responsible for threat reactivity and fear processing. So net-net, if the organism, whether it is rodent or whether it is human, has early inflammation in the brain, suffers early systemic inflammation or early brain inflammation, it usually results in the in deficits in the reward pathway, deficits in emotional regulation, decision making, threat reactivity, and fear processing. And these are common to, these are transdiagnostic because these are common to most of the disorders, psychiatric disorders of mankind, whether it's depression, schizophrenia, PTSD, addiction, personality disorders. And this is very interesting because this is again another, Dr. Smitha was talking about the work that we have from the CVEDA, and this is a recent paper, this is in press, which shows that childhood adversity leaves a memory because it disrupts the typical maturation of specific brain circuits. And in this particular paper, we were looking at, changes that occur, using AI paradigms. We were trying to look at differences in the activity of resting state circuits. And what we found was that if you just looked at all the resting state circuits, you found that some circuits were in a homogeneous pattern and some were in a non-homogeneous pattern. And when we went back to look at the individuals who had non-homogeneous patterns, we found that these were related to, or these are people who had very strong histories of childhood adversity. So even much later on, when they had become adolescents or young adults, this history of childhood adversity, this mark of childhood adversity was left in the brain. And this, in a particular circuit, which is fairly well known to be the self or the ego, and there is so much of the default mode network which goes into forming the sense of self, etc. And so early adversity leaves a trace on sense of self. This is again data from our other study, the ADBS study, where we looked at transdiagnostic patterns across all psychiatric disorders, in this case 5 psychiatric disorders, and we found patterns of deficits in three major circuits, 3 major networks. These were the default mode network, the central executive network, and the salience network, which involves the reward circuit. So again, you have the same story that these are the things which seem to get preferentially disturbed and which give rise to vulnerability to psychiatric disorders. This is further work from our CVEDA, where we have demonstrated earlier that childhood adversity leads to, if there's a lot of childhood adversity which is toxic and the child cannot escape from it, it leads to blunting of cortisol in response to future stress. And so the child or the adolescent is unable to deal with or engage with future stress, and obviously that leads to decompensation. again, this is the response to adversity. Early adversity happens in proportion to genetic risk. And so this is why I just put up this slide. I don't want to take up too much time. But having said this, neuroinflammation also is a key element in neurodegeneration. All this while we've been talking about neuroinflammation as a major driver of neurodevelopment. But it's also a major driver for neurodegeneration. And as I said earlier, when you have a vulnerability, when your immune system is already primed, something else comes on later, and the entire system behaves in an exaggerated manner. And neuronal death in Alzheimer's dementia, in Parkinson's, in Huntington's, in ALS, the common hallmark in all of these is the formation of misfolded protein aggregates. For example, amyloid beta peptide or tau protein in AD, alpha-synuclein in PD, etc., etc. Now, the common pathological mechanisms which occur long before this deposition of protein happens actually is one of increased neuroinflammation. There have been fairly elegant reviews of this process. Don't want to go into details into this. There have been recent studies which have looked at PET markers of inflammation, basically looking at certain translocator proteins which are expressed by activated microglia. And these have shown sites of inflammation for not just psychiatric disorders, but all the neurodegenerative disorders as well. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is that, I wanted to talk about the fact, I think I have a slide a little later on. Is this a common factor for brain and behavior disorders? Are we now trying to, or are we now able to see something which is like the string theory of brain disorders, which is responsible for, is a driver for not only neurodevelopmental, but also neurodegenerative disorders? Now, we are now aware that there are a large number of causes which cause systemic chronic inflammation, and these relate to chronic infections, physical inactivity, obesity, dysbiosis in gut bacteria, diet, isolation, chronic stress, disturbed sleep, and neurotoxins. Now, these are some of the most common triggers of low-grade inflammation that occur in biological systems, which give rise to a whole host of disorders, not just mental illnesses like depression and schizophrenia, but the neurodegenerative disorders, as we talked about, but also other things like cardiovascular disease, cancer, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. So the question that I was asking is, could systemic chronic inflammation across the lifespan be the string theory uniting neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative disorders? And obviously, the side question is, could moderating or mitigating neuroinflammation help treat brain behavior disorders or even preempt them? Now, again, I'm going to go very rapidly over this because I'm just trying to explore certain ideas. Now, most of the psychiatric drugs that we use, which are effective, have been found to have anti-inflammatory properties in most of these commonly used psychiatric drugs, and they reliably decrease levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines and decrease inflammatory pathway signaling. Similarly, for neuromodulation techniques, most of the neuromodulation techniques which work today appear to work through the common pathway of reducing inflammation. Also, there are a whole host of non-pharmacological interventions which have much lower risk profile than, say, the pharmacological interventions or even the neuromodulatory techniques, which are known to reduce inflammation. We'll come back to this. I'm just introducing this at the point. For example, omega-3, folic acid, vitamin D, exercise, CBT, mindfulness, yoga. The absolute safety of such interventions prompt us to look at it in large randomized studies, and this is an attractive prospect to look at easily accessible, uncomplicated, and relatively inexpensive universal interventions. Now, these are some of the things which are being looked at, whether it is neurodegenerative and psychiatric disorders. Some of the inflammatory causes are there on the right-hand side of the screen. And some of the interventions which are now being posited for positive aging, like healthy diet, exercises, nature, exposure to nature, healthy gut microbiota, meditation, yoga, intermittent fasting. Now, these are things which are being talked about in relationship to the neurodegenerative disorders, in positive aging, etc. Now, prevention is an early intervention are recognized as key elements for minimizing the impact of potentially serious health conditions. In mental health care, when we talk of prevention, this has traditionally been oriented to provide health benefits to adult populations during crisis events and major emergencies. I have one slide here, which is probably not related to all the slides there, but it's a major issue that when we talk about, precision medicine, when we talk about neurobiological thing, one of the things that is missing is the missing person. The person is missing in all our talks, and we very rarely, whenever we look at, say, interventions from the point of view of pharmacological, this whole pharmacocentric universe that we live in, or when we look at interventions from any other view, we very rarely talk about the person and the person in his or her environment. And that is something that I would like to also bring into today's discussion. Now, while all this reading was going on, I came across this documentary, which is available on Netflix, which is called Live to 100 Secrets of the Blue Zones. Now, this actually talks about 7 or blue zones, 5 or 6 blue zones, where the largest number of centenarians thrive in the longest living communities on Earth. And this has attracted a lot of attention. And this is in Okinawa, in Japan, in Sardinia, in Italy, in Costa Rica, in Greece, and in California. And this is, this particular documentary is very interesting. If anybody is interested, they can go and have a look. This has tried to distill some of the common factors, the common denominators which occur in the blue zones, which seem to be giving the people in these areas an advantage in terms of not just added years, but better health, greater resistance to most of the NCDs, and much better mental health. And these 9 common denominators are: move naturally. For example, walk. Moving naturally is incorporate walking, gardening, dancing into your natural life. Don't do something which is extra. Don't try and do something which is which you have to add on to your thing, because those usually don't last very long. Find purpose in your life. Ask yourself, why do I wake up in the morning? For example, the Japanese called ikigai, which has been written about quite a lot. De-stress. Learn to de-stress every day. Have periods when you have downtime. Eat less. Stop eating when you feel 80% full, which is basically a plea for moderation. Eat a more plant-based diet. Doesn't mean that you don't eat non-vegetarian food, but have a greater representation of plants. They have this thing called drink wine, but it's not exactly about getting people to drink alcohol, but basically about happy hours when people get together and enjoy themselves. Feed your soul. Join a spiritual community of any denomination. Feel wanted. Feel part of a community. Loved ones first. Make family a top priority. And a healthy network. Socialize with those who support healthy behaviors. Now, this is very interesting because when you look at any of these interventions, these are fairly doable things which societies do, and now there are cities and groups which are trying to get or nudge people to do this as part of their day-to-day functioning, not something extra, not walk 10,000 steps a day, nothing like that, but as part of your day-to-day functioning. But what is interesting is that these are all anti-inflammatory activities. And I looked into it. I did a little bit of study over the last 3 weeks. And what I've been discovering is that the common denominator across these is that these actually result in fairly significant reduction in inflammatory markers over time. And that seems to be one of the ways in which it achieves what it seems to achieve. So this brings us to the question that, what is happening in the later stage of life as part of, being breaks on senescence, breaks on age, being a part of healthy aging. Can it also, similar things be done as part of healthy neural development, healthy brain development? Because there clearly inflammation is a major culprit. Inflammation is a major driver of things that are happening. And this is again an editorial that came, that was written sometime last year, which said, could anti-inflammatory interventions earlier in development confer primary prevention of psychiatric disorders? So basically arguing for not specific pharmacological or not specific, high value treatments, but talking about or advocating low, low intensity day-to-day changes in functioning, which could give rise to lowered inflammatory capacities or lowered or greater ability to handle inflammation. Now, I just kept this slide to show you how this is happening. So basically, because of the exposome, there is a first hit, which increases maternal inflammation status. And then that, through epigenetic modifications, causes neuroinflammation, changes the way the brain functions, changes the way psychological capacities are manifested. That changes the way how these children and adolescents deal with their environment and engage with their environment. And that changes their vulnerability to develop psychiatric disorders. Okay, and this is inflammation which occurs across neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, and myelination. So interventions, if need to be done, have to start very, very early. Have to start with maternal inflammatory conditions. And so they have to start in the placenta. They have to start in the first to second trimester of pregnancy and continue. So some of the things that have been looked at, and I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm going to just jump from slide to slide. Happy to discuss it later. But these are some of the literature that I could find. For example, maternal inflammatory activation. There's been some literature on nutrition using micronutrients. So remember the consume. So this is part of the consume. Maternal stress regulation, pregnancy yoga, mindful meditation, mentoring in groups, reducing maternal infection is likely to bring down maternal inflammatory activation. Then again, after the child is born, in infancy, etc., using micronutrients, can decrease inflammation. Parent training to increase attachment, emotion, to improve emotional regulation, cognitive control, etc., through parenting and school environment modifications. Collaborative play, which seems to have gone out along with all our playgrounds. And the other thing is to grow a self, find your path. This entire thing of value-based education, which we can talk about. Don't want to go into great details, but belonging and socialization. Again, this is a very, very important prevention in terms of, and this is not just in this context. This, if you look at what the WHO has been saying for a long time, these are all things which have been part of early intervention, of virtuous interventions to do. So again, very busy slide, basically to say that there is accruing data, there is interesting data on prenatal and antenatal interventions with micronutrient supplementation, especially maternal choline. There are studies which show, and there are some reviews which talk about, systemic reviews which talk about the use of choline in reducing the cognitive deficits and the other emotional regulation deficits which are seen in children at 2, 4, 6, and 8. which predispose to schizophrenia, etc. There have been RCTs comparing choline supplementation, and it is fairly well known that mothers usually consume much less choline, even in societies like the US, than they need to. There's evidence for B-complex vitamins, and there is some evidence, for polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega fatty acids. Now, this is more of the same, so I'm just going to jump across these things. So choline supplementation mitigate effects of multi-cause maternal inflammation. PUFAs in pregnancy, there is some debate about this, but PUFAs in infancy are fairly well accepted, and there are good recommendations for the use of PUFAs in PUFA supplementation in infants and children. Now, this is data from our CVEDA, which very clearly shows how nutrition is a modifiable risk factor in the development of cognition. And both undernutrition, you'll see a S-shaped curve here with the x-axis showing up the BMI, both low BMI and high BMI, which is undernutrition as well as overnutrition, fast food, etc., seem to contribute to poorer cognition and greater vulnerability to future illness. Now, it's never too early to begin healthy eating habits. And I put up this slide because it shows that if you put up in healthy eating habits into children while they're infants and children, these actually last a lifetime. Parenting. Again, I put in this slide because this is data from Isha Sharma, my colleague, and she has been showing very consistently that parenting, and especially certain parenting styles, increase or decrease the risk for externalizing and internalizing disorders. I don't intend that you go through these slides. I'm just putting these as placeholders so that we can, make these points. Exercise. Again, exercise-induced immune system changes, have very major changes on the inflammatory status on peripheral and central organs. And so there is a lot of data. This is from a review, of a large number of studies, in 2020, which show that exercise is a very, very important anti-inflammatory intervention. Yoga, mindfulness, anti-inflammatory activity. There has been quite a lot of writing on that, although, so there is some literature there. Sleep, healthy sleep patterns. Again, poor sleep is related to very poor inflammatory status, and sleep, especially in young children, is very important in the context of future psychiatric disorders. Early initiation of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, fairly well documented. There's lots of data that these are things which go on to cause inflammation and inflammation-related changes, and especially early initiation of other psychiatric disorders as well. Early excess screen exposure. There is some data which is accumulating about how early screen exposure worsens inflammation in infant and child brains. Socialization. Socialization seems to be a very major intervention in terms of reducing inflammation. Not go into details, but just let's look at the headlines, because I think I'm over time already. Social support, social integration, and inflammatory cytokines. There's a lot of literature. What exposure to noxious elements in the environment, exposure to things like PM 2.5, cigarette smoke, to arsenic in groundwater. Again, these are some things which are modifiable risk factors, especially for infants and children, and these are known to cause increased risk for future cognitive deficits, future risk for mental illnesses. I've kept this to the last. This entire thing of sense of self. Sense of self, when we talk about it, we tend to get philosophical, but sense of self is very, very important for children's social and emotional development, as well as their academic achievement. And this whole sense of self is also linked to, people who have a better sense of self have better inflammatory capacities. And so let me just come to the end of my presentation. You saw this entire thing of the 9 interventions for the blue zones, which seem to promote healthy aging. So what I did was to basically put down the similar things which seem to have some support in the literature in terms of interventions that can be done in during the first 1,000 days, definitely, and also in the from the 0 to 5 period. And these relate to connecting, having a healthy outlook, consuming strategically, moving in nature, and these are related to not just use of strategic use of micronutrients, moderation in whatever you do, whether it's food or whether it is the use of your cell phone, self-regulation, learning how to downshift, self-developing self and a purpose of life, belongingness, family first. So all these things, I'm not going into details, but basically similar philosophy can be used in the period of neurodevelopment to start early interventions. And some of the early interventions that we've talked about, I'm just summarizing it in the slide. There will be obviously different things at perinatal stage, in infant stage, and in child stage. And the reason also why I have been thinking about it quite a lot is that we have recently been funded to do an early life preemptive intervention study, where we are looking at brain health across lifetime, and we plan to use some of these universal interventions, starting with pregnant females at 12 weeks and follow up at least in the first 1,000 days, using micronutrient supplementation, psychological stress coping, advice on reducing environmental infections exposures, etc. And I think the time has now come to seriously start looking at these interventions. And so, therefore, the thing is, I read somewhere a very nice line. If we change the beginning of the story, we change the whole story. And I think we really need to put in our efforts to change the beginning of this, the story that we've been telling, the story of mental illnesses across the lifetime. To conclude, I realize that what I've been talking today is not the core work that we do. It's not the evidence-based medicine that we are enjoined to follow and to teach and to practice. And I realize that it's unrealistic to consider promotion, prevention, and mental health as a responsibility of mental health professionals alone. What is required is an integrated multidisciplinary service, which increases the range of possible interventions and limits the risk of poor long-term outcome in people who have early risk. However, what I think we as mental health professionals need to do, because we have the scientific, ethical, and moral responsibility, we need to indicate the direction to other social, political, and other healthcare bodies who are involved in the process of meeting health needs, and especially mental health needs during the lifespan. I will end there on this rather philosophical note. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. I know I've rushed through some of the ideas that I've tried to present. I'll be happy to take questions, if not here, offline or online. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. We are truly thankful and enlightened. Over to chairpersons for their opening remarks, and then we can take the questions.
So I'd request Dr. Prasad to start first. I'm sorry I rather took over because I got a message saying please introduce the speaker and do the needful type of thing.
And that's perfectly fine, madam. It was a wonderful talk by Dr. Benegal. I mean, he's, I think, an icon, at least in the field of addiction, and we all strive to follow him. But today was quite different, and I really like the way that he interwove all the work that he's been doing specifically in the genetic end of the spectrum and the newer work that he's been doing, and coming to a very important and very, what can I call it, an urgent need that is there in terms of preventive intervention. Like Dr. Aleem was talking about, catch them young, catch them right in the boom and things like that. I think that is the way forward. The only problem here is, I mean, if we have some directions as to what exactly and where we could intervene, that would be the icing on the cake. But I think, yes, the thought process in this line is going to be the future, because the kind of problems that we're seeing today, we probably are called in only when the crisis hits, or what you can talk in terms of after the horse is bolted and they're trying to rein it in. So this, I think, is a wonderful way forward, and I think Dr. Benigal came up with a beautiful presentation. A lot of learning in there. Over to you, madam. Your remarks on this wonderful talk.
Thank you. This is not the first time I have heard you on this work that you're doing, and I really appreciate opening these new doors for our listeners. But I just like to sort of sound a note of caution, especially on all the remarks that have been coming in the chat box, that just as we began with genetics and we thought, everything could be explained by genes, it isn't. Actually, genes explain a very small part of the whole process of development of illnesses, any illnesses. In the same way, now we are on to inflammation, possibly as a very overarching kind of explanation for a whole lot of disorders. I suspect that they are not, they may be necessary, but not necessarily sufficient reasons, because we hear, these stories about inflammation or childhood adversity or pregnancy related complications probably do not explain the whole story, but they are a new avenue to think of and to research on. And not only that, leading the sort of lifestyle that Vivek talked about is always a good idea from every point of view. It doesn't have to have a very complicated or a scientific explanation. Just as these blue zone people said, they never read any articles, or they never read any scientific RCTs to achieve their particular lifestyle. So your message is very, very well taken, but the amount of evidence that we need for
We lost you, madam.
I think we lost.
I think she's speaking from her phone, so I think the connection is a little.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
unsteady, and here in Bangalore we are having a lot of power cuts, surprisingly.
Right.
Electricity.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, ma'am.
Electricity problem in electronic city.
If chairpersons allow, we can take a few questions on the chat box, because people are still
Yes.
typing.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you, sir. Sir, a lot of questions actually from my side also, because a bit biased, because I have also seen that documentary on the blue zones. So a lot of common sense things have been talked about there. So first, since some people from non-psychiatric background are also there, so just asking you a very basic question. Your work on C Veda and early interventions, what is the evidence where we understand now, and from there we'll go on to the common questions.
Okay, so I mean, what is indisputable is that the seeds of mental illness later in life, or the seeds of mental illness, of neurological illness, neurodegenerative illness, more and more understood to be very, very early on. That is something that there is a lot of evidence for, and so whatever the mechanism, and I take Dr. Smita's caution on board, that yes, there is no one answer. Like the genes were no answer, no, not the only answer. I remember 20 years back getting so fired up that we found all the genes, we found all the answers. But that doesn't happen. I mean, human beings and human brains are far too complex. But having said that, early intervention is something, and the answer to should we do early intervention, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
What early interventions? Yes, the jury is still out. And the problem with any kind of study of this kind is that most of us who start this work will not be alive to see the results. Because it's not enough just following kids up for 4 years or 5 years or 10 years. You have to follow them up through the lifetime. And so this is something that, the people in Alspac did. This is what the people in Dunedin did, and started off with these birth cohorts. We are just starting off this process in India. And I have begged, pleaded, and thankfully Smita has helped me in developing these cohorts, saying that it's high time we started off our own cohorts.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, Vivek,
Yeah.
I'd interrupt here. That
Yeah.
I would say almost all the work that you have quoted is very Eurocentric and very Western centric, very North centric, whatever you call that, whatever you term those societies. And they
Right.
have a very specific gene pool, beginning with the gene pool and the cultural background and the way they bring themselves up, even the environment, the weather, the social mores. So we need to have much broader work and much broader consensus to be able
Absolutely.
to give these kind of universal interventions. It's not like a
Right.
polio vaccine or a
Yeah,
COVID
it's not.
vaccine for that matter.
But having said that, universal interventions, these are virtuous interventions, which is also what Dr. Smita was saying, that there are certain things which are worth doing because they're worth doing.
Yes.
On the face of it, the face validity is good. And it's not likely to cause a lot of harm. The second thing is, why am I harping on the inflammatory markers? Because this is something which is an interesting theory. One always needs a theory to work on. One can't be just throwing stones in the dark. And a theory allows you to have theory-based hypothesis to follow, etc. And so you can have, in any scientific process, you have to have a theory which you can falsify. And that is the very basis of, the scientific process. And this is an interesting thing which is developing. There is more and more data. It's very new, and which is why there is very little talk about it, because most of the work has been done in the last 5 to 10 years. So this is an interesting theory to follow. And so these are two things which are indisputable, so to speak. And therefore, this would probably be an interesting way of going, because our pharmacocentric universe has failed us. And if you look at, all the things that are coming on the STAR-D trials, what happened, how that, the data that we know about the efficacy of our antidepressants is all bunkum. How, so we really need newer and newer ways of looking at it. There are certain things which seem to be very interesting in our armamentarium, especially in the treatment of adult psychiatric disorders and in child psychiatric disorders. And some of these things seem to work. We need to know why they work. While we are at it, I think it is also good to start developing the evidence for early universal interventions and see whether it works. For example, some of this work which is done on choline is still half-baked work, but it has very dramatic results. But that doesn't mean only choline will work. But there are interesting leads we need to follow. Just because I'm giving a talk doesn't mean that my ideas are absolutely crystallized and I have a formula to give. On the other hand, I am actually a lost soul trying to find things to do, which is why I'm utilizing the benefit of all the collective wisdom to what shall I say, to seed these ideas.
Alin,
sir,
Alin, Om Prakash sir has asked a question. I think he's online, so we can directly ask him. OP sir.
OP sir, if you want to unmute and ask, welcome.
No,
sir.
just I am asking sir ki, whether whether he advocates
Activist role.
No, I
Can
think
he
we
be
lost
activist?
his
That's what
voice
OP sir has
there.
asked.
Yeah,
I
so OP
think he
has
lost his voice.
sent a question saying whether I advocate an activist role. No, activist role is not for us. Some other people will do the activism. We are scientists and clinicians. I think we should do what we do. And
sorry,
do it.
sir, you are sir.
Again, he's got caught.
I think his connection is weak. So, sir, one thing, we have discussed this before also. So, a psychotic
Go
episode.
to activist model. That is my question.
What model? Sorry.
Activists. You said we should be fighting and activists. So whether we should go for activist model.
No, I didn't mean an activist model. I said that we should be fighting for our patients to say that they need these things. So because we can't do it alone. Some of these changes that we are talking about, which will require early intervention, will require changes at the health systems level. Will a lot of these are actually the SDGs that the WHO and the United Nations is talking about. So these are not things psychiatrists alone can do, but we need to partner with people who do it. For example, in Karnataka, we are working on the healthy aging model, which is working with the political systems, which is working with the NHM and other systems to try and see whether we can work universal interventions for people who are, for the elderly, and to try and see what, how that helps. So that's all that I meant. Very limited.
Okay. So, we have discussed this earlier, and to put it in context, so a psychotic episode at 25 years, or bipolar developing somewhere else, or ADHD developing. So, at least partially, all these things have been put in the NIDUS, the genetic pool that the person is having. Is it okay to say it like that?
No, maybe not. See, earlier, again, to go back to what Dr. Smitha was saying, earlier we blamed everything on the genetics. Right now, we know that genes or no genes, expression of the genes can be changed. And these can be changed by our exposure to environmental stressors. In fact, the second slide that I showed, that how exposure early on in life, exposure to adversity, changes brain circuits in typical ways. One of the things that you find is not just exposure to adversity changes particular circuits. When you are exposed to the stressor also matters. So if you are exposed at 0 to 6 years, when some systems are being created, then you're more likely to have disorders which affect your threat perception, threat control, etc. And these are linked with greater risk of psychotic disorders. Early studies yet. I mean, there are just 2 or 3 studies on this, but this is interesting work. People who are exposed to stress around 6 to 11, when different systems are being created, are more likely to have externalizing disorders, ADHD, addiction, etc., etc. Adolescents exposed to stress, adversity, etc., seem to have almost immediate depression and other disorders. And of course, people who have earlier exposure to stress and have later, priming, are primed later when they, face stress, are more likely to have, psychiatric disorders.
So it is the genes plus the triggering factors.
Yeah, it is the genes, and the genes are epigenetically modified. Their expression is changed. Things happen, but more than the genes, actually, very fascinating. What happens is that the actual brain structure is changed. The number of synapses which are created are changed by the activated microglia. And there's a lot of evidence for this. There is a lot of evidence for this. So activated microglia, change the rate at which brain connections are made. So brain networks are strengthened or not strengthened. They are responsible for how certain circuits are undermyelinated or overmyelinated. So these are things which we are now getting to know.
And so this stress would be individual. A person is exposed, some person is reacting in one way, another in other way. So is there any sort of tipping point? Stress should be that much level so that it is beneficial, and stress crossing
Okay,
some point.
what we know about stress is with a short, sharp shock, one or two stress events, these actually strengthen your systems. They strengthen your stress handling systems, etc. And there's a lot of biological work also there. But if you have toxic stress, that is repeated low-level stress from which there is no escape, then that results in, say, things like blunting of cortisol. That results in your inability, all these inflammatory changes that occur. So it is what is called low level but chronic stress. And so things that happen when you have poor parenting, or you have adversity in terms of violence during childhood, etc., or stress due to migration, stress due to poor socioeconomic status, these are all things where there is toxic stress from which there is no escape, and which they cast its shadow into the future.
So, sir, is it a poor poor selection that a household has a lot of chaos, argument, fighting? So the child is actually, there is double whammy on the child. The atmosphere is toxic, plus the inheritance, because the parents are anxious, they are impulsive, they are acting out too fast.
Like you.
Yeah.
But Alim, I would say, can I interrupt here?
Sure, ma'am.
Yes,
I'd just like to say that, all biological systems have a lot of redundancy. So out of the 3 children or 4 children in the family, one may end up with an externalizing disorder, the other may end up with something, diabetes maybe, and 2 may be perfectly okay, and 1 may be actually quite, well adjusted and doing very well in society. Those are the differential paths that so many people with the similar backgrounds follow. And that is where we also need to direct our attentions, so that we know what are the individual protective factors as well as the universal protective factors. Because what we are talking about right now is universal protective factors, which are good for everything, which are good for rheumatoid arthritis, which are good for heart disease as well. Doing an exercise, sleeping well, eating well, social connectivity, all those things are good for heart disease as well. They are good for hypertension as well. Keeping
Absolutely.
moving is good for rheumatoid arthritis as well. But what happens, because ultimately as doctors we'll be going down to personalized medicine, and that is, what advice are we, apart from these generic advice, what is the specific advice that we'll be able to give our patients? I'd request Vivek and his group to also direct their attention to that a little bit, that in a family or in a group of people with similar backgrounds, why is it that some people have these aberrant inflammatory responses and odd brain development, whereas others don't?
Yeah, so I don't have an answer to that, because I don't think anybody really has an answer to that. But you're right.
That's one pathway which could also be followed over time.
So ultimately, we're falling to the biopsychosocial model, sir.
Well, is there any other?
No. We see a lot of debate on this, sir. No.
No. That was always true.
With all the brainstorming and all, we are coming to that same thing, that it's a biology. There is a stress in terms of the social factors, and then there's as Madam was telling, out of 4 children, 1 will have externalizing illness, and 1 might have something, and 1 might not have anything. So ultimately,
but then
we are boiling down to that model.
Amrit, earlier we used to just say biopsychosocial. Biology is there, psychological factors are there. We are now understanding the pathways through which these work. We are getting a better idea, a more nuanced idea of how stress, or that is the social, is actually working through biology to change psychological systems, which in turn change your relationship or engagement with the world. So we are now able to trace these. So there are two things that are happening. One is we are developing a more mechanistic model of the brain. We are understanding the mechanisms better, not a lot yet, but we are understanding that. The second thing that we are now developing is models which are allowing us to predict. So as Dr. Smita knows, a lot of the data from the CVEDA was used to do prediction at n=1. We've not reached there yet, but we are now able to develop these brain developmental curves which show that people who fall off the developmental curve are at higher risk for something. We don't know what, but these are people who are at higher risk. We need more data, we need more mathematics, we need more to be able to do predictions at n=1. But we are in a better shape, I think, than the world we found.
Dr. Sharmishta has asked a question. Alim, there's a corollary to what I have asked. She has asked a question. Dr. Sharmishta, are you? Can I read the question? So she has asked, sir, some people develop resilience. So what is the science behind that? Among 3 children, 2 don't develop, and 1 does. So it's just the extension of what I asked.
So let's answer the resilience first, because the 2 children, 1 doesn't is like we said, the jury's still out. We really don't have very good nuanced data on that. But in the same way that certain things promote vulnerability, certain other things, the opposite of those, usually promote resilience. For example, sitting with, I'm just giving you a very stupid example. Don't take me up on this. For example, sitting with a cell phone and doing cell phone baji all the time reduces your ability to handle stress, reduces your socialization capacities, probably increases your levels for vulnerability to disease. But sitting with friends, going to a playing field and getting knocked on the shin with a hockey stick while on the playing field develops empathy, develops sense of self, etc., which is part of resilience. Sorry, it's a stupid answer, but you get the trend.
Okay. Sir, you talked about 0 to 6 years, 6 to 11 years exposure to stress. What about sub-0, before the child is born in utero?
Yeah, so what we are talking about is sub-0. We are talking about in second and third trimester pregnancy. We are talking about trying to do interventions there. It's a little bit dicey because there are a lot of ethical concerns here. So you try and do things for which there is either a lot of evidence, or these are things which are part of the recommendations anyway. For example, folic acid, choline, PUFAs are part of the recommendation anyway. The problem is that our mothers don't live up to the recommendation, and advisories don't help. You can give any amount of advisories, it doesn't translate into action. So having this as supplements which people take as part of the natural process might be helpful. So you look at these things. Getting a person to do pregnancy yoga, for example, is probably not likely to be very damaging. Getting a mother to talk about her difficulties, about various things to a mentor, etc., is probably not going to be harmful. So one uses some of these interventions to start off this process of looking into early intervention.
Okay, sir, a cheeky question from Dr. Rajesh. What are the effect sizes of things that we are talking about?
I don't know. And I don't think it really matters in this case. The effect sizes of the studies that I'm talking about?
Sir,
they're fairly low effect sizes, but they are significant findings. Most of the studies that we talked about.
No, for that matter, for any marker, any genetic marker or even a biomarker, the effect sizes are not, through the roof.
Yeah.
Most of them are, marginal.
Yeah.
That's why we say that it cannot be applied to a person, but it is applied to that particular group in that particular study.
Okay.
Unless the effect sizes are very, very dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Amrit.
One interesting question from Arpit Kausal. Sir, please share if there has been any progress in microglial astrocytic function modulation on the pharmacology front.
Yeah, so there have been some things, anti-inflammatory agents, which are now being used in addition to all this, usual drugs. Whether it's cycloserine, whether it's various other things, aspirin. So these are early studies which have looked at some of these things. There is some interesting data there, but again, these are things which are used after the illness has manifested itself. We are talking about a slightly different demographic. And I would definitely not want to use pharmacological interventions for infants and children if I didn't have to.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So I think, sir, for a better society, we have to liaison with the OBG experts, Obs and Gynae department.
Yeah, and the pediatricians and the people who
Yeah.
run our political and other social systems. So, I mean, yeah. So at one level, it is about the sustainable developmental goals. Okay, improving the sustainable developmental goals at the end of it. But, somehow things have to change. We can't keep doing more of the same.
Yes, and talking about the documentary, the thing to talk to the government was how much do you save in healthcare cost by investing in the preventive cost? So any points on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the documentary itself talks about how a state like Singapore has been nudging people to use, pro health, to incorporate pro health behaviors. Because one of the things which we are again of worry is that you can't suddenly at the age of 60 change your health behaviors and start, doing movement and changing your diet, etc. That doesn't last very long. Unless these are behaviors which start very early on in life and are ingrained and are part of your usual repertoire of behaviors, these don't last. But the documentary is, I don't know how accurate it is, but it is showing that some of these things vis-a-vis movement, vis-a-vis dietary interventions, etc., seem to have fairly dramatic effect in terms of change in cardiac capacity, change in terms of other things, metabolic status, etc., in about 2 or 3 years' time, in at a population level.
Okay.
We really need to see. This is a documentary, so you have to take what they are saying with a pinch of probably loads of salt. The idea is very interesting, but there are people who have also been doing this kind of work, been doing scientific work. The WHO has for years been plugging this thing and saying that, look, there are certain things which are useful universal interventions. So the documentary is not saying something which is terribly new. It's saying something very interestingly, and it is talking about things in a way that people say, wow, didn't think of that. So that's that's why it, for example, guided my thinking as well, because I saw it and I said, wow.
Okay. Sir, Dr. Sunny asked, role of L-carnosine in preventing neurodevelopmental disorders.
I haven't really come across this too much in my recent reading. If there is, please get back to me and let me know, because L-carnosine is not something I know. The drug companies are plugging it like mad, but the actual evidence on the ground is fairly.
They're pushing it for cannabis, sir. They're pushing it a lot for cannabis dependency.
Again, data is is not there.
Charlene,
Yes,
sir has spoken non-stop for more than an hour now.
Yes. Tofan sir, over to you. Before that, we can get the chairperson's final comment and then to Tofan sir.
Dr. Prasad.
Yeah. Let's again, I think I already said what I had to, because this is all new ground for me, frankly speaking. But yes, preemptive prevention per se is, I think, a wonderful way to go ahead. It would be so utopian if you could nip it in the bud and not do all the interventions much later, if that really comes into being. But as Dr. Benegal did mention, probably it's going to take more than our lifetimes to really come somewhere close. But yes, if you think in that direction, I think something should crop up. And with the lot of work that Madam you and Dr. Benegal also been doing, it was an exposure to me. It sounds very interesting rather than the mundane work that we do day in and day out. Good luck to that. I would be really hopeful to see what transpires in the near future. Thank you.
So thank you, Vivek, as usual, for a very thought-provoking and idea-inducing and argument-inducing talk. That somehow always happens at the end of your talks, and I really enjoy that. The take-home message from Vivek's talk seems to be that it's always a good idea to have a healthy lifestyle, no matter at what age you begin. So I would dispute you, Vivek, when you say that if you want people to suddenly start having a healthy lifestyle at 60, it's going to be difficult to follow. No, it does not. One heart attack or one coronary angioplasty makes people change their whole lifestyle. One knee replacement or disordered blood sugar is enough to send quite a lot of people into the arms of a healthy lifestyle. So thank you very much for giving that message to our listeners. I know that there are a lot of them, and if you can give one message that follow healthy lifestyle with just those 4 or 5 cardinal rules for good living, then it may still help us not only live better in a bodily fashion, but in a mental fashion as well. So thank you so much. Thank you, Vivek. And thank you, organizers, for inviting me. I really enjoyed this talk.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Tufan sir.
Thank you, Vivek, for your nice talk. To me, as I take your talk, I don't dispute at all. I accept completely. The truth is that the biosocial model, a psychosocial and biological model, previously thought it has 3 compartments. And then we thought of having shunts between these 3 processes. But ideally, it is amalgamated integral one. That's what the societal human being is. It is integral one. So all these things you're revealing, all you are talking is revealing. And the blue zones you referred to and which we were discussing in pre-meeting, initial warm-up, the IKE, these are the same blue zones. And at least they give an indication how we should lead life. If that life is led by a mother, it also impacts the child who is the future of the mankind. That also serves the purpose of protecting the future of mankind. Just a week ago, I had a symposium here in which I was the lone psychiatrist, but predominantly dominated by gynaes and pediatricians. And the concept was the same thing. In one session was for the first 100 days. That is conception to 75 days and 2 parts, 2 trimesters. That is the first window that gives the child all the scope to grow and have his immunity defined, have his neural development monitored. And this was all us having scientific evidence. It was purely scientific conference. Though it was being moderated by spiritual organizations, it was purely scientific one. And we had the pleasure of having many international stalwarts, along with Dr. Asa Bani of Ahmedabad, who is famous for her kangaroo concept. Kangaroo mother concept belongs to Dr. Asa Bani. And I had a long interaction with her. I fully support. It is unveiling. The truth is there. And I believe in that. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, sir. Over to Amrit.
Thank you, Vivek, sir. In a place where we cannot even catch them old, how can we think of catching them young is what I always think. And gynecologists are our biggest enemies, sir. if there is any, and I was married to a gynecologist, unfortunately, so I've had fights with my wife more about these. Why are you giving medications to this? Why are you doing this? Why are you intervening here? So I think until unless the other community is enlightened, talked about, we will be having a very, very difficult task. And the most interesting part about Dr. Vivek is that however utopian the idea is, his conviction about the idea is so good that he manages to convince you. That's the best part of Dr. Benegal. Smita madam has been very, very active, one of the most active chairpersons we have seen in our 159 episodes of Thursday Musings. Madam, I congratulate you. Dr. Prashad, thank you so much. Dr. Prasad also gave a lot of input, even if, in spite of he telling that I am naive to all these ideas, and that speaks a lot about his humility. Alim was a little overactive today. He was putting in questions. He was asking those same questions. You're not even allowing me to somewhere he needs to be. If interventions would have been made earlier for Alim, he would have been better off, I would think. Tufan sir, thank you for giving another perspective. We're a little less, I think, because the topic was very, very core, and when we have core topics, we have only hardcore people who come to listen to you. So the
many
whole
of our
idea,
viewers in transit now. Many of our viewers in transit.
The whole idea is this, sir. We don't need people who are not convinced about all these things. We don't need the numbers. We need the people who are more passionate about this subject. So thank you so much, everybody who came in. Dr. Vivek, sir, you're always there for us, and we're also there for you whenever you need to speak on a new topic. The musings is always there, sir. That's what we want: new topics, new concepts, new ideas, new thoughts, and that's what we believe in. And thank you so much for joining. Good night, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ending the meeting now, sir.
Okay.